Welcome back to the channel. Thank y'all for hanging with me on this Wednesday. So I talk a lot about topwater. I say when you're on a really tough lake, put it in your hand, don't set it down, throw it all day. But how do you know if the lake is fishing that tough or if you need to be using bottom baits or subsurface baits to really figure out what's going on in the water? So what I mean by this whole thing when I say pick up a topwater, throw it all day, there may be only one way to catch the big fish on the lake. Now, that's a pretty rare situation. So, you got to give some type of shallow running crankbait or a lipless crankbait or a chatterbait or a swim jig or a spinnerbait a good amount of time before you can say, all right, top water, lock in my hand. And that could be a frog, that could be a buzzbait, that could be a topwater walking bait, that could be a lot of different topwaters. But how to get there before you go, this isn't the only thing I should throw, because there's a time like in the post spawn after the fish have got off that white swim jig, they got off that white chatterbait, they stopped biting a spinnerbait, they just want topwater. And we're real close to summer when that happens. There's also this time, like the fake fall, pre-fall period where the days are getting shorter, but the water's still warm. They really get on subsurface baits before they get on topwater. Then it seems like for 6 weeks or a month, they only want topwater, and then the subsurface baits come back to play. And I don't know if that's a fishing pressure thing. When I talk about this out loud, it sounds like, well, fish have just seen a lot of those baits. Then they want to get on something different, and then they're only seeing and hearing and feeling stuff above their head. Then they want to get on something different then. So I think there is these trends with fishing pressure that kind of move the fish into doing different things. So for that reason, you can't be too one-dimensional with your approach when you get to a lake. You've got to try everything. And I just recently heard how if you're fishing current, you're fishing tidal fisheries, obviously the fish change a lot in those situations because the water's fluctuating. You're going to have strong current, you're going to have no current. Bass are constantly on the move in those situations. So it's important to always have a bottom fishing bait, a subsurface bait, and a topwater, and have a lot of confidence in all three water columns, because you're going to have to spend a bunch of time in those different depth ranges. But what I will say, that really should play everywhere. That mentality should be everywhere. I mean, you should not go to a lake in any season without having a really confident bait that you can catch numbers on the bottom, and a different bait that you feel like you can catch some bigger fish on the bottom. Because once you start getting a ton of bites on that Texas rig, that's typically when you can say, all right, the jig's going to be the deal. I'll switch to the jig, get less bites, but they'll be bigger. The subsurface thing is the same thing, where it's like, yeah, they want something that's darting and moving, so I'm going to throw a swank or a hybrid hunter. They want something that's falling, I'm going to throw a lipless. They just want something that looks natural, but it's shaking and hunting and moving. We'll go with the chatterbait. Or they want something a little more subtle, go with the swim jig. Or maybe they want some flash, go with the spinnerbait. But you see what I'm saying? You can just run through that rotation, and then the more you try, the more that you go through every bait you have, then it's like, okay, we're not going to see any big fish on these baits. That's when we need to change to just the one type of bait. But I think this is pretty obvious to a lot of people. But as fishermen, we get in this hard-headed mentality where we're going to Kentucky Lake and we're like, we're just going to throw a spook. But the time that you did good at Kentucky Lake on the spook, you threw a lipless for 6 hours, you threw a chatterbait for 5 hours, you spent 4 hours flipping docks and 3 hours dragging a shaky head. You did all these other things to figure out that, okay, the spook's the only thing I have to throw. So these pre-notion, whatever you want to call them, preconceived notions where you show up to a body of water and you're like, this is what I got to do, that never works. It never works. That's why when you start catching them on a lake and you think you can just go back there the next year at the same time and do the same thing, you typically always do bad. It's always going to be a different part of the lake. It's always going to be a different bait. And maybe not just lakes, but like ponds, rivers, way up a creek, little tiny backwater areas. It's always something different. These fish are moving and they're being pressured. So it's always going to be something different. And when you're like, yeah, in the fall, they always bite a spook or a frog and a flipping stick, then you see guys weighing in the top 5 bag with a chatterbait. And it's like, I thought a chatterbait was only good this time and that time. No, we're in the day where you got to try everything. So the fish have seen everything. And if you don't give them the options that they want, they're not going to bite. We've all learned that. We've all seen that. If you don't have forward facing sonar, you just watch videos. Good baits that were really good a year or two ago, they just fall off. They fall off because the fish have seen too many. The fish have probably been caught on those baits. So that's one thing that I look at the deck of my dad's boat, and it's like, okay, you got to cover every base. And then I think of the good tournaments I've had where it's like, I caught all my fish on one bait, but we went through 12 baits and we spent a lot of time. We were very confident in all 12 of those for days before we realized that, okay, we got the right bait. So try that, guys. Don't be hard headed. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.